All right, Eli and Stacy, all you. Welcome to the Community Advisory Committee meeting for the Comprehensive Transportation Plan update.
Good morning. This is a meeting of the Community Advisory Committee. The bulk of this meeting discussion is reserved for the CAC members. There will also be time for public comment at the end of the meeting to allow general public participants an opportunity to ask questions or make comments. A public meeting for the general public is scheduled for October 29th. Information about that meeting is available on the project website. That will also be a Zoom virtual meeting. The CAC members are representatives of the community stakeholder organizations. CAC members have been engaged throughout this process and have participated in a series of meetings over the past year and a half. In order for the team that's operating the meeting to know the difference between general public and CAC members, if you are a CAC member, can you please raise your hand? And if you're on the phone and you are a CAC member, please press *9. I'll give about 15 seconds for folks to raise their hand and then put it back down. I think it's important to note that staff are monitoring the Q&A window. Questions that come to your mind during the presentations, you can just drop in the Q&A and they will be verbally addressed during the Q&A parts of the meetings. We'll also create the opportunity, when I say create the opportunity, the team will, during formal Q&A periods, also allow for the CAC members to make verbal comments or questions. If we run short on time, questions that are not responded to verbally will be responded to within the discussion summary. All comments submitted through the Q&A will be provided to the project team for consideration, although they will not be verbally addressed through the meeting. In the context for both CAC members and the public, understanding that this is an initial draft, we are seeking both your engagement, participation, and feedback in this session, but we would request written feedback to the project team by November the 6th. That feedback can be provided directly to me at ecooper@a2gov.org. You don't have to write that down. The last slide will have that contact information. An additional opportunity to provide feedback on the draft plan will be at the October 29th public meeting. Before we begin, I'd like to really take this brief opportunity to thank all of the CAC members for your valuable contributions to this project. I don't think that it's inappropriate to say we could not have done this without you. During Stacy's presentation, she'll point to times where elements were specifically offered up by the CAC or CAC feedback helped shape the direction. So this is our last scheduled meeting of the CAC, and I did want not to wait for the end because I realize some people may not be able to go all the way through the meeting, to again take this opportunity to thank you for your participation and your valuable contributions during this project. With that, as an overview and introduction, I believe it's my role to introduce Stacy Meakin, who's the project manager from Sam Schwartz, and she'll be leading us through the presentation and the polling questions. Again, thanks for your engagement here this morning.
Thanks, Eli. And I want to start by echoing Eli's gratitude for all of your work throughout this process. And thanks for joining us today. Sorry it has to be such a formal feeling setting. I wish I could see you guys in person. But we're adapting best we can. So we've laid out a PowerPoint or a presentation, and we've built in places for polls, and as Eli mentioned, some spots for Q&A. We're going to try to keep to time so that we get through everything. And so some of the Q&A we might have to cut short as we're going through, but we'll just see how it goes. So we're trying to find that balance of engagement and getting through the material. And so I think that I am actually going to turn this back to Gage to go through some technology.
Yep. Thanks, Stacy. Just to go over some of these Zoom basics for everyone, so we're all on the same page. There will be multiple opportunities to ask questions throughout the meeting, like it was said. When you have a question or comment, you will raise your hand. I will acknowledge you and enable you to unmute yourself. And after you've asked your question, I will lower your hand. You may also lower your own hand if you no longer want to ask a question. If you're joining online, the raise hand function is at the bottom of your screen. You also have the option to type your questions into the Q&A function, also at the bottom of your screen. You can check to send anonymously if you do not want your name to be publicly visible. If you're joining over the phone, you will press *9 to raise your hand. You will then receive a prompt through your phone that you are able to unmute yourself. In order to unmute yourself, press *6. Again, if you are a CAC member, go ahead and raise your hand now so I can enable you to talk. But still, as a reminder, please raise your hand when you have a question. Thanks, Stacy.
Great. Actually, Eli, were you going to go through Zoom meeting norms?
I can also do that real quick.
Okay.
Yeah, so just some basic etiquette for Zoom. We are planning to start on time and end on time. Please raise your hand to be recognized to talk. We would like to have one speaker at a time to keep things orderly. Please move to a quiet area wherever you are so that background sounds can be minimized. Speak loud and clear so everyone can hear you. And everyone will be provided a chance to speak before a repeat speaker, just out of fairness. Of course, be respectful of other ideas, and also try to distinguish between facts and opinions. It helps for clarity. And then any inappropriate behavior will result in an attendee being removed from the meeting.
So we will provide meeting summaries that will be posted to the website no more than 2 weeks after the meeting. And Eli already mentioned that we have a public engagement session next week. And but through this meeting and that all the input we get, we wanted to remind everybody that this is not a decision-making process, but we are taking your feedback. So with that, I will get started. So what we want to go through today is just a review of the plan process. I know a lot of you are very familiar with the process as you've been immersed in it. We're going to give an overview of the draft plan document itself, just to kind of orient you to the different sections. And then we'll go through value by value, some select strategies, and what we are really asking for feedback on today are the metrics that we're proposing. So through the strategy overview, Jeremy and I will be tag teaming the different values, and then we also have some polling mixed in that we will ask you to engage with through either a smartphone or another browser on your computer. And then at the end, we'll have open Q&A in addition to the Q&A that we've built in along the way. And then finally, a public open comment period. So the plan overview, the plan process is consolidated. This long process has been consolidated onto this one screen. To summarize it, we've been talking to the Transportation Commission, the Planning Commission, the TAC and you all today. And so I just wanted a snapshot of what we've gone through in this process. So we've boiled it down into 3 phases. The first phase being discovery phase, where we were really trying to learn about the existing conditions and establish where we're trying to go, establish those mobility values and goals. I'm not going to go through all this in detail because you guys have been part of the process, and for the sake of time, I'd rather get to the strategies. So just some other, just briefly though, high level, we had the ideation phase next, where we were really gathering ideas from best practices from you all on strategies. We had a long list of strategies that then we asked for more input on, that helped us get to this action planning phase, where we were organizing those strategies, prioritizing them, figuring out how they all fit together to get to that end goal. The end goal, or I should say goals, being that we want to move together towards 0 deaths and 0 emissions. And these are really kind of directives, is how I look at it. You know, the city had already decided that it wanted to move toward a goal of Vision 0 by 2025 before we came into the picture. And with A20 also set a very strong vision for 0 emissions. So we took those as our marching orders, and with respect to A20, we've really adopted any of the mobility strategies from there into this plan so that they're working together. No pun intended on that. All right, so another brief overview of the different phases. We did find, as I'll probably say more than once through this presentation, that what we found is that Ann Arbor has been doing a lot, and you've been doing really well, but it's an ambitious community, and we're not to 0. And so there's still more progress to be made. You'll remember that through public input and through stakeholder input, we arrived at these 5 values that guided the development of the plan. So safety being the first, mobility, accessibility for all, healthy people and sustainable places, and regional connectivity. Part of that ideation phase was this best practice review and looking at different types of strategies that that people have used throughout the country, and discussing how they might fit in Ann Arbor. Applying those to corridors, the focus corridors and intersections, and vetting those with stakeholders and with staff. And then I mentioned already that that phase where we came to you with that long list of strategies. We did something similar with the TAC and the Transportation Commission. And all of that input led to how we organized the plan and how we identified what we're calling the key strategies. So those were the strategies that the TAC, the Transportation Commission, and staff all thought were the most important strategies to get us to the goal of 0 deaths. So in the plan, we've outlined those in pretty great detail, and then every strategy also describes how it relates to the values. Many of the strategies, most of them, possibly all of them, speak to more than one value. So we've not organized the plan based on value, but we did identify how it is helping you get towards that value. We've also identified how it speaks to the various E's and the timeline that we've assigned to that strategy. And I should note that the timeline is based on when the city should start that particular strategy. It's not suggesting that everything in that strategy has to be completed within that timeline. So this is a just a sample page from the plan to show you what the key strategies look like. We have the current state. So what's happening now. The kind of a shorthand of what the strategy is, and then the full sentence of what the strategy is, followed by that current state where we are now. The strategy description, which explains what's being proposed, the values that they speak to, and then a timeline, lead agency and partners, and targets for each strategy. Now, I mentioned we want to get some feedback on metrics today. We also have metrics at the value level to help track how the city is getting towards those overall values. We're not going to have time to go through all of the targets for every strategy, but we are happy to take that input separately. So in addition to those key strategies, we also still had a lot of strategies that we thought were important to get to those goals. And we've included those as a full matrix that includes the key strategies as well as all the additional strategies based on timeline. And those, excuse me, those still have associated with them the lead or partner and partners, how it addresses the 5 values, which E it pertains to, and targets for each one where applicable. There are a handful where there might not be an applicable target. So I'll keep coming back to this, but wanted to plant this seed in your minds that when we were developing the metrics, we are thinking of these 4 things. Is it valid? Do we think that metric accurately measures what we're looking for? Is it reliable? Is it a metric that you can compare, year after year or every 5 years, and it's kind of the same type of scale or metric? Simplicity, is it easy enough to get the data so that we can actually commit to measuring it and have the resources to do so? And is it meaningful? Is it actually, helping us get towards those goals? So I'm going to switch my screen now and invite you to open up a browser on your phone or computer and go to menti.com. And once you're there, there's you can put in a code, which is at the top of the screen here. 4412484. So if you're on a phone, it might look like this. If you're on a browser on your computer, it might look like this. The code will always stay at the top on every slide. And we're going to keep coming back to this program. So we have, a handful of polling questions within each module. So once you have this open, you can just keep it open and off to the side. So I'm going to ask you to click the heart button once you get into this program so we can gauge how many people are successfully in Mentimeter. And if you are having any problems, if you are trying to log in to Mentimeter and you're having any troubles, feel free to raise your hand and we can try to troubleshoot. Also, if you are not able to participate in this and you still want to give the feedback, Also, raise your hand or say after, and we can conduct the polling questions with you separately.
I do have a raised hand from Jim Sayer. Jim, I'm going to ask you to unmute and you can ask your question.
I was having trouble logging in. I see that there's 15 other people logged in, but it says click on the heart and I'm not able to see the heart highlighted in the bottom right corner.
On Mentimeter?
Yeah.
Are you on a phone or a computer?
I've tried it on 2 devices, 1 computer, 1 phone. So,
okay, are you seeing the screen that says let's get started?
Yes.
Okay, that should be fine. I only ask you to click the heart so I know how many people are in, but if you're seeing that screen, then you're in.
Got it. I thought it was going to take me to another screen. Thank you.
Yep. All right, so it looks like we actually had a couple people join maybe in the last minute or two. So just to catch people up, we are in a polling software called Mentimeter, and you would go to menti.com and type in the code at the top here, 4412484. And so if you want to log in, these first polling questions are not critical, as you can see. So if you're slow to get on, no worries. These are kind of icebreakers. So tell us, what is your favorite way to get around? You should be seeing this on your screen and able to click on a response. No transit takers this morning. Ah, prove me wrong. All right, well, this gives me a sense of what people might be interested in. Have you had a chance to review the plan yet? You can choose, I've reviewed it entirely, I've reviewed portions, or I have not reviewed it. Great. Oh, and before this meeting, we just wanted to get a sense of how many people have been consistently involved in this planning process. So please note if you have been to 0 meetings, 1 meeting, 2 meetings, or 3 meetings. So this is our 4th meeting. If you've been to all, you've been to 3. I think I inadvertently hid the answers to this one. I did not mean to, but okay, so have you participated in public engagement for this plan, either online, in person, or neither? And you can choose 2. So if you've been online and in person, you can just choose those both individually. Okay, great. And now we're going to turn back to the presentation and go through some safety strategies. And I guess before we do that, I will open it up to Q&A for a couple minutes. Does anybody have any questions before we get into the strategies?
Yep, as a reminder, if you're joining online, you can ask a question by clicking the raise hand icon or typing your question in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. And if you're joining on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute.
Okay, I'm not seeing any raised hands. Do you, Gage? Okay, there will be plenty of opportunities to ask questions. It seems like we all want to get into the meat of the plan. So as you've heard me say before, I'm sure one of the core tenets of Vision Zero is to really focus your efforts where the crashes are happening, the serious crashes are happening, both geographically and in terms of what's causing those crashes. So our first two strategies in the plan deal with the focused corridors and intersections, which we have talked about before. You see the concentration on several, just a handful of corridors, which we have categorized as tier 1 being the most important and tier 2, and similar with intersections. And so we've laid out a handful of different ways that the city can focus on those corridors and intersections, be it through new capital projects, coordinating with other projects or other ongoing studies, and using the quick build safety program, which is a separate strategy. So a lot of these strategies will also kind of work hand in hand. And we, as part of our planning process, also developed concept plans for select focus corridors and intersections. And the intent with these is to just kind of get the community started thinking about the possibilities and give you guys a way to get started on these. I think a lot of these would still require additional study, but this kind of gets the ball rolling. Again, focusing on the dangerous behaviors, how we've addressed that is there's a slew of tools that can be used to address those behaviors. So we laid out a toolbox that really kind of breaks down into street design and operations tools that includes setting lower speed limits, developing a program for traffic calming on major streets to complement the traffic calming program on local streets, traffic calming that's specific to left turning vehicles and left turning maneuvers. And then there's also a set of education and encouragement tools focused on messaging around safe driving or Vision Zero, driver training, and impaired driver training. These are just a handful of them. This is the full list. And then we've identified which type of behavior it best addresses. So we had also laid out an all ages and abilities bike network, which I'll touch on later. But we felt that it was also important to focus specifically on intersections for biking, because intersections are where we are seeing the majority of bike related fatal and serious injury crashes. And it's also, the area that is the most challenging for building out a safe and comfortable bike facility. So we put a fair amount of attention to this strategy, laying out again a toolbox of options and identifying key intersections where the city should focus. And I already hinted at this. We have a strategy around the quick build program. So this is kind of twofold. This is a recommendation to establish a program and then lays out a toolbox of different types of treatments that could be part of that program. And then we have laid out a number of metrics at the value level that we think that would be good to track the progress of getting to that safety value. In this case, the 0 by 2025 was kind of a given that was already established. But we've kind of broken it down a little bit more here. So we have the annual number of people killed or seriously injured in traffic crashes would be reduced to 0. We think since people walking and biking are disproportionately affected, that tracking the share of serious injuries and fatalities by people walking and biking is a good metric to track, as well as tracking the share of the dangerous driving behaviors that are causing those crashes, because tracking that will then help you identify in that other toolbox for that strategy what you might need to focus on. And then this last one basically tracks the action of the plan and not necessarily an outcome, but tracking that you're continually working towards safe conditions through the number of safety improvements installed per year. So this is just a reminder of how we got to these metrics. And I am going to share my second screen again and do another poll. And then after this poll, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So are you guys all seeing the slide that says safety? If you are, please press that heart button. I see some more people logging in, so great. Okay, so for all of these modules, these questions are going to look the same. We want to know, how effective do you think each of these safety metrics is, from not at all to very, keeping in mind that we're trying to come up with valid, reliable, simple, and meaningful metrics. Okay. Give one more minute or moment, maybe not a full minute. Great. So we also want to hear how realistic you think the targets, the numbers that we set are, from not ambitious enough to too ambitious, just right being right in the middle. So the 3 safety improvements per year is trending towards the lower end, towards not ambitious enough. That one I admit we've kind of debated ourselves. I think it's tricky the way we've written it for sure, because 3 safety improvements could vary quite a bit from the low end of maybe one of those quick build curb bump outs type of thing to a much more intensive safety improvement. So on the next slide, oh, not this one. We'll come back to my thought in a second. So this is an open-ended question, and we wanted to hear any lessons learned from Healthy Streets. I think that these answers are not going to pop up on your screen. And we just wanted to get some input. So take maybe a minute or two. I don't want to spend too much time, take up too much time on this. Oh, they are going to pop up.
And hey, Stacy, it's Jeremy. It does look like there's a hand raised and a question in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, we're going to shift to that right after the next question. Great. Okay, so I am going to move to the next one, I think. Oh. Okay, I thought sorry, I thought I built in an open-ended question for additional thoughts you had on those metrics, if you wanted to elaborate on maybe different metrics that you'd like to see or different targets. So we could do that through the live Q&A. So I see in the typed Q&A, are all these stats, e.g. the 80% biking, the 80% in the biking slide from Ann Arbor? You're talking about the 80%, this 80%? Yes, that is from Ann Arbor.
We have a hand raised from Jessica Lita.
Okay.
Jessica, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, this is Jessica. I'm the Executive Director of Building Matters Ann Arbor and on the board of the DEA. I'm curious, in the safety measurements that you've got, one of the things that would be important to look at is overall mode statistics. I know that one of the conversations that we had as a community this year was that vehicle collisions were up, but when we looked at it, actually, well, this is of course before the world ended, but traffic levels were up, and actually vehicle crashes had not been rising as fast as the level of traffic had. So in actual fact, if you looked at it statistically, our numbers were better. So I'm curious, are we only going to be looking at absolute numbers, or are we going to be looking at them as a percent of modes as well?
Thanks for your question, Jessica.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say that both, I guess. I think we primarily want to look at the absolute numbers because we are trying to eliminate all fatal and serious injury crashes. So while it's great to see that the rate might be going down, we still want to get to 0. Any other questions or comments, thoughts?
Just a reminder on questions, go ahead and type them in the Q&A window or raise your hand. And if you're joining on the phone, press *9.
So I see an I support Catherine's suggestion. Do you mean Jessica about looking at the rate of crashes? I assume. And then the safety improvements installed seems too vague. Maybe instead focus on a % improvement on each of the other categories every year. So you're talking about the metrics. Okay, that's good input. Any other thoughts on that metric are welcome, or any metric that great. Okay, so I was supposed to be on this slide when you guys were asking questions, sorry. But you guys seem to have it down. So I'm gonna stop talking for a little bit and let Jeremy go through this module.
All right, thanks, Stacy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thumbs up. I did try to start my video to give a wave to everybody, but looks like the host is not allowing me to do that. But good to be back with you all. I wish, as Stacy said, that there were different circumstances, but hope everybody's staying safe and healthy out there. I'm going to talk through the next few sets of kind of categories that the strategies are lumped into. As Stacy kind of indicated in the upfront, there is a lot of overlap really in terms of strategies that meet multiple different values in this plan, but we've taken a shot at trying to group them according to this general value that it most links to. So I'm going to go through mobility first, and we'll have a metrics conversation about this one as well. It really starts with, and I think based on who's in the room, a lot of interest in this aspect of it. This planning process has worked to define a future low stress bike network that really goes beyond what might be considered the standard bike lane into more buffered and protected infrastructure that's more available and accessible to a wide range of folks with different ages and abilities, really to underscore the use of bicycles as a convenient and safe and comfortable way to make a lot of the trips that need to be made in and around Ann Arbor and affect the mode shift. So that's a major outcome of this plan and something that is shown on a map, and we're definitely looking for input on for that. We also looked at crosswalks in a lot of different places. This slide is focused specifically on standards for uncontrolled crosswalks. So these would be places where there's not a stop sign or a signal that is getting motorists to stop. There's a number of those locations already in and around the city of Ann Arbor. We've suggested that each of those locations be looked at to make sure they conform with the crosswalk standard that the city has established, but also based on public input and feedback from folks like you, we've identified a number of additional new locations that are shown on this map where uncontrolled crosswalks could be placed and be put in a standard that meets the new crosswalk standard. The plan focuses on transit and ensuring a high level of transit accessibility and service quality for residents of Ann Arbor. The previous plan identified a number of what's called signature transit corridors stretching around Ann Arbor. That's be State Street, Fuller and Plymouth Road, Washtenaw Avenue, and Jackson and Huron. A kind of standard for transit quality would be a service that is arriving at each station, at each point along the line, every 15 minutes or potentially even better. That's a frequency at which people can basically use transit without needing to consult a schedule. It makes it much more convenient than a system that is arriving maybe every hour or every half hour. This plan looked at those corridors, at least based on the pre-pandemic conditions. We know that the transit system has had to adapt during the current time frame, but identifies some places where to really meet kind of the signature standard, not only during the peak periods, but also throughout the day and Saturdays, which increasingly are important for people to access work. Looking at making sure that there's improved frequency along some of the corridors, and also identified a number of secondary transit corridors, Packard, Miller, and South Main, that can also be looked at to meet a certain standard. Just trying to spread the coverage of frequent transit that can be accessed by residents of Ann Arbor at any time near their home to get into the core of Ann Arbor or to other places around the city. Within those different locations, also looking at transit priority treatments, especially for those signature transit corridors. So these would be things like signals that allow buses to go more frequently through the lights, or bus only lanes or queue jumps that give transit a path around congested areas. We know that shared mobility, so these would be things like bike share and e-scooters, are an increasing set of way to get at these kind of small distance trips, like less than 3 miles. 47% of trips in urban areas in Michigan are less than 3 miles, and shared mobility can really help kind of fill that gap. So we know there's been movement in the city so far in this space, but continuing for the city to continue to find ways to integrate those modes safely and effectively on a citywide basis. And then using signal technology, there's been a lot of advancements, and there continue to be in terms of adaptive signal technology that the city's already using in a number of corridors, but continuing to deploy those types of resources as a way to deal with congestion, which is something that is really isolated to a lot of the timeframes in the morning and evening rush hour. 94% of the delay that drivers currently experience coming into Ann Arbor or just traveling around Ann Arbor are during those morning and evening rush hours. And signalization offers a chance to adaptively deal with those types of congestion issues. So when it comes to mobility measures and metrics, we're looking at things like the population that lives within that quarter mile of the all ages and abilities bicycle network. It's about half the city today, looking to get essentially near 100% by 2030. Again, the population that lives within a quarter mile of what would be considered high frequency transit that arrives every 15 minutes. It's about a quarter of the city today, looking to significantly increase that by 2025. The share of the trips made by walking, biking, and transit, which is already high by Michigan standards anyway for Ann Arbor, but continuing to really push those transit and bike networks to allow that growth to continue to occur and to hit some of the reduction in auto travel targets that you'll see later in the presentation. And then building up that fleet of available car share, bike share, e-scooters that are available to Ann Arbor residents is another metric. I think we're going to do a similar exercise, Stacy, to the last time.
Yes, just need to shift over to that screen.
And we're looking for your feedback again on whether we're measuring the right things and whether some of the targets that have been set kind of sound like effective or efficient or achievable targets based on your understanding and which ones you care most about. So I think Stacy, you're gonna, looks like we got about 9 folks that have hit the heart so far.
Yep, I'm just gonna move on though. I'm not sure everybody's focused on the heart. So if you,
yeah, if you're having any trouble, I guess reconnecting or getting back in, just I suppose raise your hand.
Yeah, and just a reminder, if you did leave that screen and have to go back to menti.com, the code is always at the top of the screen.
All right, looks like we have 12 so far. Looks like the top 3 are in a similar range, with maybe shared mobility is trending toward the very, but a little bit behind those upper 3. By the way, as you're looking at these, you know, there's the average number, and then you can also kind of see the range shaded in the background as well, and that gives another sense of kind of the range of answers that we're getting on that, and whether any are super high, super low. Okay, next is, you know, for those same metrics around mobility, whether the targets themselves are ambitious enough or maybe too ambitious overall. So right down the middle for the first one.
Just right.
All right. Looks like it's down the middle, maybe a little bit too ambitious on the non-auto trips and the ages and abilities network there, but pretty close to the midpoint for most.
So we have a couple of questions that came in through Q&A. Given the pandemic, perhaps a switch from fixed routes to a hub and spoke system needs to be considered for transit. This can lessen the total time a person is on a bus and exposed to viral load. So it sounds like you're talking about during the pandemic.
Right. Yeah, I know we had a conversation yesterday as part of the technical group with Triple ATA, and they've been doing a lot of thinking about how to adapt and continue to adapt, I think, during this pandemic. You know, I think our planning study, I think it's fair to say overall is focused on maybe a little bit more the long-term situation. And a more normal state of affairs in the future. But I know that that's a tricky balance that they're trying to deal with in the meantime. I don't know how to exactly respond to that. It looks like Catherine might have a piece that she wanted to offer.
Yeah, I guess so. No, in general, shortening transit travel times with hub and spoke moving forward. Okay.
Right. Well, that's something we can look at. I mean, I think that the hub and spoke model is kind of how the transit system, at least the rides transit system, is organized today. I think maybe part of what's being described is more of a direct point-to-point kind of service versus needing to kind of do transfers from one service to the other, which is kind of a feature of the hub and spoke as well. But yeah, maybe that's a question or something we can take into consideration and take back to Triple ATA.
And Jessica had a comment here, which she says she doesn't need an answer, but I'm going to answer it anyway. in the share of trips question, basically would the modes be broken out? And what we're proposing is that would be based on an annual survey, and so you would have the data of modes and be able to drill down on that. And I think the metrics as we're laying them out is basically for the sake of reporting back to the community on progress. So the reporting out could also be broken down. The data would be there.
And I think that Grace's question, I do think we're going to address as we get further into the regional connectivity item. But that is a part of the strategy, Grace, related to park and ride locations, and something that we intend to, that's included in the plan, just not focused on in the mobility section at the moment.
Sorry, these are kind of shifting as I'm trying to read them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question about proximity to transit again. I think that's a good one. I think comfort and safety is super important. It seems that the biggest issue in somebody choosing to use transit is the frequency of that service and whether they can rely on it to be frequent when they need it, not only on the way in maybe, but also on the way out in the middle of the day. And so I think the focus is on service quality. And if we're talking about signature transit corridors, making sure that they meet a certain standard in terms of the amount of service that's out there. There are other parts of the plan that talk about for those highly utilized locations, investing in additional transit waiting infrastructure, mobility hub type of improvements at the stations to make sure that it's also a comfortable waiting experience off of the vehicles themselves. But the best way to, I think, address that is to make sure that people aren't waiting long periods of time for vehicles, especially in kind of high usage corridors or signature transit corridors. Should we keep paging through these, Stacy? Do we have any seasonal adjustments on ridership? I'm not sure if I understand the question there.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I was talking, but so I think that question is asking about you know, we have share of trips as a metric, but that might change summer versus winter. And again, that's based on a survey, so we could definitely build that in. But we want to be seeing an overall shift regardless of season. Okay, so I think we should move on just for the sake of getting through these the last three values, and we can come back to these questions if we have time. Are you guys seeing the accessibility for all slide?
Yes.
Great.
Great, thanks, Stacy. Talking about accessibility, focusing on critical gaps in the sidewalk system. I think there's a number of gaps. I think we've identified, or I think the city really has been tracking this and identifying for a number of years, a large number of miles of gaps. This plan identifies about 10 miles of the near-term gaps that are really kind of a focus, and looking at filling those, setting a target for that, and potentially even, as shown in the picture there, considering some lower cost ways to do that, because as you may have guessed, a lot of the gaps that remain out there are the ones that are harder to fit, harder to fill, depending on where they kind of are in the system. looking at reduced fares for both transit and for shared mobility, especially for qualified unit users. These would be folks with lower incomes than that may not be able to afford the same amount of transit and shared mobility types of uses, making sure that those services are accessible to a wide range of folks with the highest level of transportation and mobility needs. Some steps have already been made in this space, but continuing to offer, the types of reductions that are shown for senior citizens, for example, who make up a lot of the lower income users of the system, of course, making sure those types of reduced fare programs are also available to those based on level of income or need. And making sure that the city is continuing to look to ways to identify, engage with underrepresented voices in the community. This is something that's really come up out of our, this process. I think the CAC, as well as some of the comments that came in through the public, just making sure that not only thinking about the projects that are being delivered and making sure they're delivered in an equitable way, but that that information and strategies to engage people and to give them a voice within transportation decision making is something that the city continues to work on as a key priority. Specifically focused on accessibility in the downtown, recognizing that it is a people first space and something that the DDA has been working on. That much of the space, about a third of the space downtown is still allocated toward car usage primarily, and looking for opportunities to share some of that space, open up shared street installations in some key locations. And that's something that I believe the DDA is currently looking at in a couple different places, but setting some standards for other places to make those types of investments. And shared street spaces are those where cars are moving, allowed, accessible, but there's more of a balance in the space for pedestrians and other mobility users to also use that same space. So in terms of accessibility for all, some of the metrics that we're looking at and targets that we're looking at, of course, household income and the expenditures on transportation is a big factor in terms of somebody's personal mobility. So looking to increasingly drive down the percentage of transportation costs as a household expense. Currently at about 18%, getting that down to 15% as a metric to track. Average number of jobs that can be accessed within 20 minutes via different modes, such as transit and bike. So continuing to expand those networks throughout the city would allow for a greater job shed, basically, for anybody to be able to access a job within 20 minutes from their home. The share of bus stops that are ADA accessible. This is something that has been worked on over a number of decades, really, but there's still a gap there. There's still additional stops that cannot be accessed, either because there's not adequate sidewalk infrastructure to get to the stop, or something in terms of the stop itself that needs to be addressed. So filling that gap by 2025. And then again, the miles of gaps in the sidewalk network, getting down to from 145 down to less than 8 over the long term. But focused in the near term on some of those 10-mile gaps that were addressed in the earlier slide. Similar exercise and opportunity to offer comments, questions, or raise your hand. So please go ahead and get back into the Menti and let us know what you think about some of these metrics and the targets that have been set.
Are you guys all seeing the Mentimeter screen?
We are. Yeah.
Okay, great.
All right. Looks like, again, most of these metrics are trending toward the upper limits here. Sidewalk gaps in the lead.
Too many different things to control. I forgot that I was on mute. All right. Looks like we have 12 people. 13. Oh, look at that. When I hover over it, as Jeremy said, you could, the outline shows you how many people voted for each score. I didn't realize it would tell you the actual number. Okay, so move on to the targets. How realistic are the targets?
Yeah, there's a item in the Q&A there about some of the sidewalk gaps actually being stairs, which is true. Yeah, so these become, that's an example of where those gaps are in many cases difficult to fill.
So it does seem like you guys feel like these targets are just about right. All right. So I want to go, I think we're good here. And I want to go back and just maybe clarify and answer about the share, the seasonality of the share of trips. I think we would want to see an average of a 50% reduction. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that it's based on non-auto mode. So basically, if somebody is a seasonal bike rider, we would want to see them shifting to transit if they don't want to bike in the winter, for instance, so that we're seeing overall year-round a 50% mode share that's non-auto. Okay, so I see one hand, and we do have still some written Q&As coming in.
Yeah, if we're entering the Q&A session, we can go ahead and answer some of the written questions first, and then we'll move on to Jessica, who has her hand up. Okay. Just a reminder, you can raise your hand if you have a question, or type *9 if you are on the phone.
Okay, great. So I'm going to read off the question, and then Jeremy or I will try to answer it. So does the proposed strategy look at encouraging bike commuting from outside Ann Arbor, particularly connecting to Pittsfield Township? Significant work in this area. I-94 is a barrier to linking. Yeah, we also heard last night of of barriers at the borders. So I would say, please maybe review the intersections, the strategy for biking, and also the bike network. And if you feel that there are specific areas that we should pay more attention to, if you could give us that feedback, that would be great. Inbound commuting is significant for workforce, so connectivity at the borders is important to consider. So I think that's a pair there. From Nate, you may get to this in other sections, but what will be studied and or supported regarding multimodal travel, i.e. bringing a bike to a park or ride, or using a bike share or scooter for the last mile. So we do have a specific strategy focused on access to transit, and where we have some details of what we're recommending there. And again, I would ask if there's anything that you feel is missing from that strategy, to please give us that feedback.
The plan does offer some discussion of, I mentioned mobility hubs previously, and just to illustrate or elaborate on that a little bit, there's some specific locations within the city where those types of enhancements, where we see a lot of trips potentially converging, and opportunities to put more bike parking and kind of multimodal connections at transit stations all in one place. Of course, there's a lot of, trying to do that on a system-wide basis, you kind of have to start and prioritize in certain locations. But that is an element, like Stacy has mentioned.
Yeah, great point. Jeremy, thanks for elaborating on the mobility hubs. So from Vince, buses need to be more comfortable, not hard seats, better shocks, and simpler routes riders can understand. Drivers seem to be careful, which is great. I assume you're referring to bus drivers. I don't know that there's much that we can provide this feedback to the ride about the hard seats and better shocks. I think that's a bit out of the scope of this plan to recommend specific vehicles. But Jeremy, do you want to speak to the simpler routes at all?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that's part of what we're getting at with that previous in the mobility section, making sure that the routes that are going out throughout the city of Ann Arbor have kind of a consistency and a regularity to them that can be relied upon. That's something that a lot of systems are moving toward, is kind of a way to make sure that transit is more accessible to the non-frequent user. We know that a lot of the ridership of transit today and in general is folks who rely on it day to day and have learned the system and understand the system, and that the more complex the system is, the bigger barrier it is basically for kind of that infrequent user to get on, or the person who's never used it before. So being able to communicate that these are corridors that have regular service that can be relied upon is part of a strategy that's being suggested in this plan. We've not gone into kind of a full kind of hashing of the route network and whether it should go in a different way, but I believe that the ride is separately in the midst of kind of a long-term vision planning that might be a little bit disrupted at the moment by everything that's going on. But I do think that type of input for them, both on the types of vehicles they're using, as well as kind of the long-term route network, are things that they'd probably be interested in getting some input on.
We do have the hand raised from Jessica. Jessica, if you want to go ahead and answer, or I'm sorry, state your question.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I see what you're talking about in terms of the types of improvement, in terms of filling sidewalk gaps, making sure that so much a proportion of the population is within, a quarter of a mile of transit or sidewalks, or bike network, excuse me. I'm curious if there's an overlay to that decision making that's going to prioritize marginalized communities, whether it's low income families, non-white communities, things like that. Like, are we prioritizing accessibility in some way that focuses equity?
Uh,
My earbud fell out during that. I think you're asking, are we overlaying metrics to prioritize based on equity?
Correct.
Yeah, so I think we try to get at equity in a number of different ways, including that coverage that you referred to. We didn't find like a strong geographic correlation to equity measures to be able to say like you focus on this quadrant first. So while I agree that that should be a priority, we might have to think more creatively about how to do that. You know, I think some of the strategies are specifically geared towards that, such as the reduced fare program that Jeremy mentioned for both transit, but also shared mobility. So if you have any specific thoughts on how to better incorporate that, I'd love to hear them. We could even talk offline.
Thanks. I'll put some in the comment box, and then if you want to talk offline, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great, thanks.
One more question / comment in the Q&A. Some sidewalk gaps are actually stairs, a few miles, but a lot of money.
Yeah, I think Jeremy addressed that actually while we were going through the Mentimeter poll.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep, just acknowledge that there's definitely truth in that. All right, Stacy, thanks. Another value is healthy people and sustainable places. This is really to do with the ability of Ann Arbor residents to use healthy and sustainable modes, and really kind of pairs up with some of the other initiatives that we know the city has already been launching, including sustainability initiatives to get to zero emissions. A key foundational aspect of that is the concept of the 20-minute neighborhood, which for those who haven't kind of been introduced to that concept, basically says that anybody living in the city, in any neighborhood in the city, should be able to reasonably access key things that they need in their lives, whether that's parks, their job, schooling, even retail and fresh food options. So this is both a transportation and a land use strategy, right? There are both a need to have sustainable transportation metrics or networks that, like we've been talking about, to get people from home to various things within 20 minutes in a convenient way, but also looking at a mix of uses. And that doesn't mean necessarily a mix of uses for individual developments, although it could mean that. But as we're looking at neighborhoods, making sure that there are resources like parks, like schools that are nearby, are accessible to a wide array of Ann Arbor residents. Another thing is to continue to look at ways to price trips according to their impact on the city. We know that as has been said, peak periods are when a lot of the work trips are happening and a lot of the congestion happens on the system, and that puts the biggest strain on the system. So continuing to try to use economic tools to address the cost to the city of people using the system during those timeframes, especially when they're using more consumptive modes like single occupancy automobiles. Of course, the biggest way, or one of the main tools that's available currently for that, is the price of parking in places like the downtown or in the campus areas. But a lot of cities are looking at other ways, road user fees and such, to be able to address the added cost of using transportation in those time periods. And that's something that the plan identifies as something the city could study going into the future as an option. Speaking of parking supply and demand, there's some thought in here about the 20-minute neighborhoods and the key signature transit corridors, especially that other modes should be kind of a priority for those. And so looking at land use means such as within the Unified Development Codes to remove parking minimums, or especially in those well transit served areas, actually establishing parking maximums that would limit the amount of parking that goes in with any particular development. And these are some of the metrics that we've come up with. So a big one is to target the average vehicle miles traveled. That's a metric that just basically measures how much cars and trucks and other vehicles are moving around the city on a day-to-day basis. Cutting that in half, and I think that's consistent with some of the sustainability planning that has been put out there and recently adopted by the city. The share of neighborhoods that could be considered a kind of a 20-minute neighborhoods, or the share of population living in such neighborhoods, we estimate that to be about 80% today. So there are some gaps on the fringes of the city, and looking to close that gap to make sure that all Ann Arbor residents live within something that could be considered a 20-minute neighborhood. And then the share of the population that meets physical activity guidelines, just the health of the city and overall, and the transportation network's role in providing options for more healthy and physical activity. So these are some of the metrics we have for the healthy and sustainable places. And I think we're going to do a similar exercise again. So, okay, these are some of the metrics that are being suggested here. So the question on the table again is how effective are these as metrics to measure health and sustainability in the future of the transportation system? Are these not at all effective? Are these very effective? Looking for your input on these. All right, looks like we're up to 10 respondents so far. Up to 12. So it looks like the winner in this category so far is the share of population within a 20-minute neighborhood. If you have, just like in previous ones, if there's things that are measures that might be missing, feel free to drop those in the Q&A chat or raise your hand. And then we set some targets, and the targets for those same metrics are on the table here in terms of whether they are too ambitious, not ambitious enough, or just right. All right, looks like, again, we're kind of hovering right in the middle. So seems like general agreement that the metrics themselves and the targets for them are on the right track. It looks like, Stacy, we do have a few in the Q&A. Do we want to jump to that part of it?
Yes. So Jessica, what? Okay, I thought for a second I
To
wasn't.
flash the screen again, but yeah.
You guys can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Jessica has elaborated on the equity issue, and I kind of wanted to follow up with that as well. We did have in the fact book a map of, I think, what we called transportation equity factors. And so we've referred back to that through a couple of strategies to focus efforts on those areas. But I appreciate your input here as well about the Washtenaw County Equity Officer. And so we can either add reference in to that resource or check with her. All right, sorry, I've got comments coming in from various sources. Okay, so does the current 20-minute neighborhood share of 80% mean that 80% of residents can access fresh food within a 20-minute walk? So we don't have that granular level of data to know if it's classified as fresh food. We have access to, I think that's basically includes access to a commercial destination. And then another question that can be rhetorical, are we asking these questions only of Ann Arbor residents, or are we asking them of people working in Ann Arbor too? The VMT number would change drastically, and possibly so would the strategies we're using, like more park and rides, if we're accounting effectively for commuters. So the VMT reduction goal is for within Ann Arbor, which would include people driving into Ann Arbor or coming to Ann Arbor, and hopefully therefore not always driving into Ann Arbor. Another question from Grace. I understand the pricing strategy, but worry about the impact on the lower wage earners that are traveling from farther away and the impact on the local retailers and restaurants. It could cause a more difficult time getting employees, etc. I also wonder how much you've considered people coming into town for visits or tourists. That is also quite a large impact on the volume of traffic Ann Arbor sees. So the pricing strategy is a complex one that I think it is definitely a fine balance between discouraging or encouraging the kind of transportation you want to see and versus discouraging travel altogether. So I think you'd have to do some more study. It's not something that we would just propose going in and charging roadway pricing, for instance. But there could be some really effective strategies to both make it easier for people to get places by some modes while discouraging driving. And so looking at those strategies together as a combination, we think can have a really good impact on congestion and emissions in Ann Arbor. Does 20-minute include the ADA upgrades required for all travelers? I'm not sure I understand that question. You mean the 20-minute neighborhood? The 20-minute neighborhood is based on a 20-minute walking distance. So maybe John, are you asking if all of those routes are ADA accessible?
Right, because we've been, I mean, Ann Arbor's done a great job of upgrading it, but everyone's behind on upgrading and reaching ADA standards in their communities. And is that going to be something that is considered in this?
So we didn't go down to the level of detail of taking out like curb ramps that are not ADA accessible, but we did consider if there's a sidewalk gap that's not part of the 20-minute network. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I would add maybe worth noting on that question, Stacy, that I believe there's a strategy in the plan related to updating the city's ADA plan, essentially, for infrastructure and other services, which is kind of a legal document, legally mandated document anyway, that has not gone through an update in a while, and that is a recommendation in the plan to kind of do a review of where things stand in terms of compliance and continue to set priorities into the future for both, facilities, but as well as transportation in terms of ADA compliance and accessibility.
Right, and that recommendation is in part to keep up with those standards and recommendations, because these recommendations or technology available and best practices, continue to evolve. Okay, I don't see any more hands or questions that are outstanding, so we'll go on to the final strategy overview. As some of you have already noted through the Q&A, the travel into Ann Arbor from outside is significant. And so regional connectivity was, from the very beginning of this plan, stressed as important to us by staff, by public, by you all. We heard it from a lot of different angles. And it's also confirmed in the data that what we're seeing, the vast majority of the delay on streets, delay to vehicles or drivers, I should say, is during a very small portion of the day, during those morning and evening rush hours. And so we think that developing or expanding the transportation demand management program that currently exists in downtown to be a citywide program to help shift those trips from driving to other modes, and coupling that with some transit supportive land use and development can go a long way to encouraging transit use in particular. We also know this is a regional issue. And so one of the strategies within the expanding commuter-oriented transit services is to support the Regional Transit Authority as a body that oversees and manages transit on a regional basis. Because while this is a very important issue to Ann Arbor, it cannot only be an Ann Arbor initiative and can't totally live in Ann Arbor and be driven by Ann Arbor. It is a regional issue and needs a regional body to oversee planning and development of it. So we've also included some recommendations around supporting the regular express bus service, the Air Ride and A2D2 regional bus services. There's been a lot of work to date on an Amtrak station and regional service in Amtrak. I just saw on Twitter last night Joe Biden's proposal for Amtrak service countrywide, which was very ambitious and encouraging. So continuing to plan for that is also part of this regional commuter-oriented transit strategy, and expanding park and ride lots. This was part of the A20 plan as well. And we got some comments yesterday about how to even bolster that recommendation further through the use of MDOT intercept lots. So looking towards metrics for the regional connectivity value, we're looking at increasing the share and almost doubling the share of commute trips that are on transit, and doubling the use of some sort of TDM program pass, whether that be the Go Pass specifically or an equivalent. So that section is a little shorter, in part just because all of those strategies, as we mentioned, cross-cut a lot of strategies. So a lot of the ones that we already talked about with respect to, say, signature transit corridors, we think are really part of this regional connectivity value as well. So we want to hear, how effective do you think each of these metrics is? Okay, great. Trending towards very effective. And how realistic are the regional connectivity targets? Okay. It's good to see that you guys all generally think that we can achieve these, because a lot of these, you know, in Arbor, I would say, is an ambitious community overall. So it's not surprising that you think that we can achieve them, but they are ambitious. So I'm encouraged that people are behind this. So I think here's my open-ended question. I forgot that I just kept that at the end. So other metrics. This is an open-ended. You can type in an answer. I can leave it up for a while since it's our last polling question. So don't feel rushed. And we can continue to go through Q&A in the meantime, but feel free to type in other metrics you think we should be tracking that we haven't gone over at a high level. If it's specific to a strategy, feel free to type that in as well. But if you could note which strategy you're talking about, that would be helpful. But you can also provide that input separately by emailing Eli with your comments. If anybody else had any questions, either live or typing into the Q&A, let us know. Raise your hand.
There is one hand raised from Vince Caruso. Vince, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and state your question.
Yeah, thanks for taking the comment. I think that we need to make sure that we take advantage of the newer technologies like e-bikes. I think we're going to have great opportunities with getting people out of cars, reducing pollution, and making a healthier city. If we encourage e-bike use and e-bike storage at your destination, I think we have great opportunity in Ann Arbor to be more bike friendly. We're a pretty level city. We're not very hilly. A lot of little cross streets, and I like to see the fact that we have a bike boulevard now down Washington. So I think those opportunities are perfect for Ann Arbor, and we should take advantage of that. And it'll be a win-win all the way around, in my opinion. I think it would be healthier, less expensive. Like your report shows, over $8,000 a year to own a car is pretty substantial, and you could reduce that cost tremendously. We have one car in our family. We do a lot of bike trips and walking. So I think we need to take advantage of that, and I think we're moving that way. But I think we need to move on the Greenway, which would handle a lot of bicycles. And as some people say, you know, the people who ride bikes spend a lot more money in town than people who drive cars. So thanks.
Thanks for that feedback, Vince.
I see some other metrics popping up in Mentimeter, so thanks. Any other questions? Or overall comments?
I'm seeing no hands raised. And I believe, Stacy, you are going to be closing out this meeting. I just want to launch this poll. It's an anonymous demographic poll. So go ahead and fill that out. This will be open until the end of the meeting, and this is only for people who weren't able to fill this out before the meeting. All right, Stacy.
Thanks. So just for, in terms of next steps, we do have a public meeting coming up a week from today. We're holding that at 2 p.m. It'll be a similar format. It'll actually be a very similar presentation and source of strategy for feedback from the public. So I'd actually be interested to hear any feedback of how this meeting went. Again, I am regretful that it feels so formal and that we can't just sit in a room and chat. So I hope that this Mentimeter polling and the presentation gave you a good overview of the plan as it stands and gave you good opportunity for providing some feedback. Following input and feedback that we get from you all and some feedback that we got yesterday, along with anything we get from the public meeting, we'll be refining the plan and taking it to the Transportation Commission, if that timeline works out, on November 18th. and then following that up with a planning commission meeting on December 1st, which then initiates a longer statutory review process. And so with that, I think we open it up to a public Q&A. Do I turn that back to you, Gage?
Sure, yeah. Just as a reminder, public comment is now open. You are allowed 3 minutes to speak. If you are joining online, you can raise your hand or type a comment or question in the Q&A function. And if you're joining on the phone, you can press *9 to leave your comment. All right, I am seeing no public comment or questions. I'm going to turn it over to Eli to close out the meeting, but you should see some contact information on your screen if you'd like to leave a comment or question there as well.
Okay, as I stated at the beginning of the meeting, I appreciate and continue to appreciate all of your engagement in the process. I would like to echo Stacy's observation that although I think this meeting felt like it went very well, it's a little impersonal compared to the way that we typically conduct public engagement in this Citizen Advisory Committee. So thank you for your willingness to endure the technology as we continue to forge forward in this pandemic era. The opportunity for comments already been covered. Feel free to give me a call. My contact information is on the screen. Send any written comments to me. I'll make sure that they get shared with the project team and incorporated as we move forward. Stacy did touch a little bit on the lengthy approval process. Last comment that I would make in closing is that this plan is a part of the city's master plan. And as such, we have to adhere to the statutory requirements for adoption of an element of a city master plan, which includes county and adjoining community review. I appreciate the observations about commuters coming in from outside the city. Our adjoining jurisdictions will actually have a formal opportunity to provide input to us on that. And then we'll go through a cycle of Planning Commission, Transportation Commission, and City Council approval. So as you get thoughts moving forward through the fall and winter, feel free to give me a call, drop a line, and participate. There will be public hearings convened at appropriate milestones in the statutory approval process. Again, stay safe, be well, and if I don't talk to you before, have a happy holiday season. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.